Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the U.S. Payments Forum webinar, Mobile and Digital Wallet Strategic Considerations for Merchants. My name is Kathy Medich, and I'm Associate Director for the U.S. Payments Forum, an affiliated organization of the Secure Technology Alliance. I'd like to note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for playback along with the presentation deck after the webinar has concluded. There will be time for questions at the end, so I encourage listeners to submit their questions using the user dashboard on your screen. I'll return at the end of the presentation to lead the Q&A. I do suggest that you submit your questions while our speaker is presenting so we have time to organize them in advance and so we can get to as many of them as we have time for. For those of you who are new to this webinar series or who are not familiar with the U.S. Payments Forum, I wanted to give you a brief overview. The Forum is the cross-industry body that's focused on supporting the introduction and implementation of EMV and other new and emerging payment technologies. The focus of the organization has evolved over the last few years from being singularly dedicated to EMV and its migration in the U.S. market to a broader focus on other technologies beyond the card and the EMV transaction flow. Our work continues to support adoption of EMV for late maturing segments of the retail market like petro, hospitality, and transit. And we're also looking at both issuer and merchant considerations for implementing the new contactless cards and devices. We've also increased attention on providing education and resolving issues affecting payments that go beyond EMV, like mobile payment and tokenization, different authentication technologies like biometrics, and emerging standards addressing e-commerce channels like 3D Secure, Secure Remote Commerce, and new fraud mitigation tools to combat card-not-present fraud. The Forum brings together leading companies in an open forum of equals across the payments ecosystem. Our members represent the global payment networks, financial payments issuers, merchants, processors, regional payment networks, mobile service providers, industry suppliers, integrators, associations, government, transit operators, and others who are interested in the payments ecosystem. We do this through a number of activities. We collaborate on projects to develop resources to assist with EMV and other new payments technology implementation. We develop education programs for members and for the industry, such as this webinar, workshops, and our forum member meeting tutorials. We have a strong market outreach program to communicate the recommended best practices and industry positions that we develop. And we provide a networking forum for stakeholders to interact with all payments industry stakeholders so that everyone can understand the challenges that each player in the ecosystem faces. You can find more information about the forum and the resources we've developed at www.uspaymentsforum.org. This Mobile Digital Wallet webinar series is a product of two of our working committees, the Mobile and Contactless Payments Group and the Communications and Education Group. These groups have planned a series of 4 educational sessions on mobile and digital wallets as part of a Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today is the 3rd of this series, and we hope all of you have made plans to participate in all 4 webinars. If you missed the first 2 webinars in the series on the mobile wallet landscape and the security technologies, you can follow the link you'll receive after this one and access the recordings and presentations from those first 2, as well as from this webinar. This webinar will focus on strategic considerations for merchants, and our final webinar on February 21st will cover issuer considerations. After each webinar, there will be an optional short online assessment available to test your comprehension and retention of the material presented. Everyone who participates in all 4 webinars and receives a passing grade on the online assessments will receive a certificate of completion from the U.S. Payments Forum. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Laura Townsend from the Merchant Advisory Group. Laura serves as the SVP of Operations of the Merchant Advisory Group, or MAG. In this role, she's responsible for delivering on operational optimization strategies on behalf of MAG's merchant members through collaboration with industry stakeholders, which is an integral part of MAG's overall strategic plan. Previously, Laura led corporate cash, consumer payment, and global digital product management initiatives, including emerging innovative consumer experience opportunities at McDonald's Corporation, most recently as the Senior Director, Global Cashless and Digital Products. In addition, Laura has held various leadership roles on external industry boards and special interest groups with the objective to drive positive change in payments through multi-stakeholder collaboration and education. Laura is also active in U.S. Payments Forum working committees in providing the merchant voice. I'll now turn things over to Laura.
Thanks, Kathy. MAG does appreciate our engagement with the USPF. This is one example of how we continue to find ways to partner together towards improving the payments ecosystem, so thanks for having us. A little bit about MAG that Kathy didn't mention is just to give you a little bit of a scale. The Merchant Advisory Group, we affectionately refer to as MAG, was founded in 2008 by a small visionary group of merchants in the payments field that were dedicated to driving positive change in payments. And I call out through multi-stakeholder collaboration, just like the U.S. Payments Forum, we work towards, improving the payments ecosystem through that collaboration. Where we fit in is we provide that merchant voice among the various stakeholder forums, such as U.S. Payments Forum and others, as well as directly with our payment providers and partners in the ecosystem. And my role, which she described a little, is really fundamentally simple. It's to find opportunities to collaborate with the industry at large so that stakeholders can understand the merchant perspective and take that into consideration as they build products, build innovations or new processes, and as those things all evolve. So, we represent about 140 of the largest U.S. merchants. We account for over 3.4 trillion in annual sales. And of that, over 73 billion card payments, electronic payments, are accepted by our members, which equates to about almost 60% of volume in the U.S. So, we represent a large group of electronic payment receivers in the U.S. As you heard, my background is over 20 years at McDonald's. So I really come at this truly from a merchant retailer point of view. And so I think you'll see that throughout the conversation today. So you've heard about the various types of mobile and digital wallets in the market, as well as the security they provide from the prior lunch and learn presenters. So now let's talk about the merchant considerations. So Kathy, you can go to the next slide. As we know, and we've heard in the prior sessions of the series, there's a ton of changing, the mobile landscape is always changing, and the volatility of wallet providers, really make it difficult for merchants to know with whom to partner or how to prioritize features, mobile features and products. And as we make strategic decisions, there are various factors we have to consider. Including the impact to its retail operations. I think that's a huge consideration not everybody thinks about, but of course also the customer experience a retailer's trying to deliver. And that goes beyond payment, really, that overall commerce experience. Merchants need to make strategic choices on which partners will deliver on that desired experience and how long, frankly, they may be around. Not the best example, but you look at this slide we just created not too long ago, and we just learned, that Microsoft Wallet is going to be retiring at the end of the year. So there's always change in this space, and we don't know who might fill that spot next time around. So, one of the questions I often get is why the industry can't deliver on a consistent payment experience across retailers. And my answer is for many reasons, but the real crux of it is it's not one size fits all. What works for one retailer may not fit in another retail environment. The reality is that the value prop of one mobile technology may solve one pain point for one retailer in a very fabulous way, while that same technology or service can cause pain points for another retailer. So, even within the same retail company, one technology may work well for one operational delivery model, while causing pain points for another delivery model. So I'll give you an example coming from McDonald's. I say Apple Pay as an example, at the front counter improves throughput, offers simplicity for the consumer. That's a customer facing terminal that you're interacting with. However, when you think about Apple Pay or the other contactless technologies in a drive-through, that's a difficult it's not necessarily customer facing payment terminal there. And as you've seen, there's a pay on a stick model, I call it. I think it's been referred to. I didn't coin that term, but it's not necessarily ideal or convenient for either the crew person that's having to hand that out the window or the customer. So, contactless in the drive-through isn't necessarily probably the most ideal experience that you might want to deliver to your customers. The point being that overall commerce, experience in example, Sam's Club is very different than a QSR. Warehouse and QSR, completely different models. And that's different than Petro and convenience as well. So, talking about the Sam's Club, even when you think about, even within one retail company that has two brands, Sam's and Walmart, you see that Sam's Club, offers the scan and go experience, which some of you may have experienced yourself, and it works well in a warehouse environment with one central exit point. But that same experience doesn't necessarily fit best operationally in a Walmart branded location with 20 plus checkout lanes and no centralized exit. So you have to keep in mind that retailers compete fiercely. And although all retailers want a seamless payment experience across, all their channels, they'll find partners and solutions that offer value-added services that really complement the overall customer experience they're trying to drive within the operational constraints they may have as well. So back to the question, why doesn't the industry deliver on a consistent payment experience across all retailers? I would turn that back to you all, to ponder. I mean, really, should we? I think a lot of these experiences in market today are quite exciting and convenient, and they vary quite a bit. I think we'll all have different answers to the question, but it's clear that there are many alternatives in the marketplace, which suggest there isn't necessarily one mobile payment technology or solution that's really the shoe-in or the go-to. So Kathy, you can advance the next slide. So what do merchants need to think about as they build out their mobile acceptance channel? I'll talk about each of these considerations that you see as we go through the next 30 minutes or so. Just to note, the Merchant Advisory Group developed a merchant mobile product analysis tool back in a couple of years ago. And many of these concepts that are going to be shared here during this session are also included as considerations within this tool. So we'll share with you, in addition to the U.S. Payments Forum white paper on mobile and digital wallets, there are some other sources that merchants can leverage to assist them as they consider making these types of decisions, including mobile. But we'll provide that detail a little bit later. So let's get to the first one. So Kathy, you can advance the next slide. First, and I think critically important, is the consideration of customer engagement. In my opinion, the payment experience is one that is embedded in the overall commerce experience and really shouldn't drive the overall commerce experience. Instead, I think payment complements or supports that overall experience. I think of payment as the supporting actor, kind of like the Christopher Walken of commerce. If you all know Christopher Walken, although he had some lead roles early in his career, he seems to have migrated to a supporting actor role, but he is one of the most memorable and frankly hilarious supporting actors I'm familiar with. But as retailers think about strategic direction, I think a critical aspect of mobile is how you leverage the overall platform, not just payment, the overall platform to engage increase the level of engagement with your customers and that engagement your customers have with your brand. So in defining a mobile strategy, there's a huge opportunity to capitalize on new ways to engage that customer. What are the value-added capabilities where mobile offers the customer a unique benefit? Some of the engagement levers that mobile can support are around offers and deals. Isn't it compelling to get an offer from your favorite retailer that's relevant to you based on your interests or your product usage in the past? And wouldn't it even be more compelling to get offers that are relevant based on time of day or where you're physically located at that point in time, that you can easily redeem in the moment, seamlessly. Another level is access to information, or lever is access to information. Have you, when you think about some of those features, I don't know if you've experienced, the ability to take advantage of electronic grocery lists. I think that's hugely, valuable for someone who loves lists. having it more available electronically? And what if those grocery lists reflect, in-app of your retailer, your grocery store that you go to, the aisle location of each item in the physical store you're in based on GPS? No matter how many times I go to Target, there's usually one item that I don't always buy that I have to search for. And things like that make your experience overall could be more seamless if they could point you in the right direction based on your grocery list. And then thinking about storing electronic receipts, to access easily through your mobile device in the event of a return that you may have. Warranties for electronic products that you buy, in the event you have a repair request, they're readily available through that one branded mobile app experience. These are the value-added services that really help to simplify, the experience of shopping. Loyalty, you can't say enough about loyalty. A significant opportunity is the integration of loyalty with mobile payments in some way. And that includes real-time redemption of rewards or other value. And that's both the earn and the burn side of loyalty. It's not earning loyalty points otherwise eligible for that you would otherwise get when introducing a new way to pay, or requiring multiple actions by the customer to redeem loyalty points separate from payment, is introducing friction that's really negatively impacting the customer experience. So these are all the levers around consumer engagement. So to start the journey, I think the first question merchants should be asking is, what opportunities does a mobile payment solution offer to enhance their overall customer engagement? So you can flip to the next, I think we have a polling, and this is just to make sure you guys are paying attention. So as you heard, one of my favorite actors is Christopher Walken. So I just want to know, what is your favorite Christopher Walken appearance? We've got Fatboy Slim, Weapon of Choice music video. We've got the Deer Hunter, all the Saturday Night Live cameos that he had. There was a new, not a new movie, but a movie called Seven Psychopaths I just watched. And then for those of you who clearly have no interest in this poll, can respond with who is Christopher Walken. It also gives me a sense of the personality of the audience. So we'll give you a few minutes or a few seconds just to respond to that poll. Okay, so we got, so Saturday Night Live is clearly a fan. I would highly encourage all of you that do like Christopher Walken to watch the Seven Psychopaths. But so anyway, thanks for entertaining me a bit. So back to the real show. If you want to just jump to the next slide, thank you. So another consideration of merchants is how much control or influence they're gonna have over that payment experience. As a retailer, a good or a bad experience is a reflection on your retail brand, regardless of the party in control over that payment experience. Merchants take the customer experience very seriously. And retailers need to ask themselves how much they want their brand equity to be managed by a third party. That tolerance level will feed into the mobile payment partner product you would want to engage, and the requirements you will have to influence that control or influence or control that experience. An analysis of the customer experience as commerce takes place can identify points that could be improved or by changing the experience. Outsourcing a portion to a third party is doable. Merchants just need to realize they may be at the mercy of that third party provider to get access to those analytics for that portion of the payment experience to determine points of drop-off or behavioral patterns suggesting consumer confusion. And the other consideration is, even if the analytics clearly identify opportunities for improvement, the merchant is again at the mercy of that third party to enable those improvements. We all know changes or enhancements with things like, that involve technology can go through a prioritization process. And without having control over that prioritization, those enhancements may not meet your business needs and timelines. Proprietary solutions, mobile solutions, typically can offer more control over that overall experience. However, there's an alternative perspective for some merchants, who don't have the expertise, tools, or resources. Those merchants may benefit from outsourcing of the payment experience, but it's critically important to understand the requirements for submitting things like requests for changes, SLAs regarding performance expectations, et cetera, if you do outsource. Finally, the consumer experience is significantly impacted by the level of approval rates and false declines. Retailers need to decide what features they make available to manage the balance between a good customer experience and levels of fraud. The more control a retailer has in those decisions, the better likelihood of increased control overall. So Kathy, you can go to the next slide. The next consideration is consumer adoption. What does that mean? It's overall enrollment and active use, I would say, across different demographics by industry vertical of whatever that payment alternative that you're looking to accept. This information helps a merchant evaluate relevance and the potential impact a mobile payment solution has on its customer base. A slide like the one shown here can be very misleading without the context behind it. The value of the parameters is important. As you can see, you've got here PayWave listed, Visa PayWave. And that's a contactless brand, which I would suggest that many mobile customers won't know given it's not necessarily a consumer branded product. But so that's the elements of whatever the usage or customer adoption results that are being shared. You need to interrogate the data, probe a little bit, ask lots of questions, because if they're sharing information, you just want to understand where it's coming from, the source, etc. So just by way of example, this survey, it was U.S. specific. It was in December 2017. It was only in store. There were only 111 respondents. They were all 25 years old or above. So, the questions you should be asking as you're getting information like this from alternative mobile payment providers is the number of respondents a representative sample based on the number of retail locations you have? Is it concentrated in a certain geography, and is that applicable to your business? Are you only interested in one type of channel in store, or are you thinking about doing in-app or wallets that are online, cross-channel as well in your consideration set? How is this research funded? Is it unbiased? And are you targeting this age group, or is there a segment missing from the research? You really, another thing is, does it incorporate all the leading technologies, which we'll talk about later in the marketplace, like NFC, QR code, and other players? So bottom line is, ask basic questions, and you'll likely be enlightened by the response. And I would suggest if you ask for customer adoption numbers, and the response is that we don't share that information as confidential, I would say politely say thank you, and you will be in touch. I don't think there's any reason why a retailer should not expect to get that information in order to make an educated decision on acceptance. Kathy, you can go to the next slide. So, we have a polling question, yes. So our next polling question: which mobile payment solution have you used in the last 3 months at a retailer, either at the point of sale or in-app online? So we've got the pays, we've categorized them together: Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay. Merchant-centric wallets, like the Walmart Pay or Starbucks, Kohl's Pay is another one. Network-centric wallets, we've got American Express, MasterCard, and Visa. I think American Express, Express Pay, MasterPass, and Visa Checkout. And then issuer-centric wallets, such as Chase Pay as an example. And then the alternatives, we've got PayPal, WeChat, or Alipay. So it looks like the majority of folks have used the pays, but following that is the merchant-centric wallets, and then finally the alternative checkout. So you can see, and I'm sure there may be multiple. I don't know if individuals can vote for more than one. I can't remember, but it looks like it's a good cross section of participation in the various wallets that are in market today. Lowest being the banks. So interesting. So the next area of consideration is just overall payment channels. I already talked about the various operational models that can exist within one retailer, like a drive-through front counter, offering delivery or curbside. And we know customers want to shop wherever and whenever they choose across many different devices and channels. This means that the payment offered across various digital channels is another consideration. So you may have mobile, you may have kiosk, you may have website, and you have to think about whether what you're offering to your consumers should cross those channels as far as a payment alternative. So it's not just about mobile. I think it should be much more broad when you're thinking about how you're delivering your overall experiences. So for example, a retailer who offers a mobile in-store payment may want to enable that same payment alternative through an in-app order ahead buying experience or an in-store kiosk buying experience or even online, really to maintain that consistency across channels. I will say, in my past experience at McDonald's, there was kind of a frustrating example of inconsistency that took time to overcome. Although Apple Pay was accessible to our customers in store since we had launched contactless at least 10 years earlier, it was not accessible upon the launch of our mobile app. And from a consumer standpoint, I may want to use that same payment alternative regardless of the channel in which I shop and buy, regardless of the fulfillment method that I choose, etc. So although Apple Pay is now available in their app, there was a period of time where we lost that opportunity to offer that level of consistency. Some mobile payment solutions are specific to the mobile channel, while others can cross channels. And the question for the merchant is what is acceptable and what is not, depending on the capabilities and the experience you're trying to deliver. So Kathy, you can go to the next slide. Overall product features and roadmaps. As merchants think about acceptance, it's really important to think about what's next. So the product features mobile solutions offer today are obviously very relevant. Some mobile payment applications support only credit or debit. If your organization wants support for closed loop gift cards, ACH, private label products, those applications that only support debit credit may not be a good fit to start. However, understanding the product roadmap for the future is just as important. You want to accept payments that will grow with you, grow with your consumer base, and complement your longer-term strategies. So it's important to understand whether the feature roadmap is expected to evolve and by how much and when. For example, is loyalty integration available now? Is it coming and how soon? Is it acceptance of mobile payments prevalent to international tourists coming to your retail locations critically important? And if so, how is the support for those potentially coming over time? And then, do planned features attract the merchant's targeted consumer? For example, if Gen Y or Gen Z types of consumers make up a significant percentage of your customer base, things like split payment or split the check feature, that Venmo could offer could fit really well within your mobile payment offering, given that the younger generation, are large users of P2P payments. So are features available that solve a customer experience issue? I mentioned earlier the redemption of loyalty rewards or offers with payments in a single scan or tap or whatnot. That to me, offers a much more robust experience. So is that on their roadmap? And once a strategic path aligns well with a provider or providers, merchants have to then consider the investment required for development or integration, which will certainly depend on the path they choose to take. So next we'll talk about technology, which kind of is a nice dovetail. So the technology side of the equation, there are certain technologies that may require additional hardware and or software integration development. The obvious example is that the right hardware is required to enable contactless. What may not be so obvious is that additional software integration may be required to enable specific AID selections, such as priority selection of the U.S. Common AID, which also could come with pinless debit capabilities to ensure the merchant can take advantage of routing alternatives on contactless. All of it's doable on contactless, but it takes additional effort, which needs to be built into timelines and resource needs. So it's important for the merchant to know that off-the-shelf terminal software may or may not necessarily support your business needs. In addition to kernel configuration, there may be that may be required to ensure that common AID selection works properly to enable routing choice. There's also screen prompting of off-the-shelf terminal software that may support customer AID selection versus merchant AID selection. And this can cause customer confusion and impact your overall cost of acceptance, which will have to be factored into your overall ROI. Setting aside the technology development, I think one aspect of retail many don't fully understand the significance is the scale and implications of deployment and associate or crew, cashier, store personnel training that's required to implement new technologies. Back to my memories of working at a retailer, the technology teams worked really hard to enable advancements in technology. And you're thinking about a few hundred individual business owners, because at McDonald's they were franchised across 14,000 U.S. locations and over 20,000 global locations. That was not easy. When you think about the deployment of all of that and the training associated with all those crew people, operations folks, that was probably more, at least as difficult to execute than the development. Again, these anytime an associate touches the consumer directly, when it comes to a payment, the education and training they receive has significant influence in the types of mobile payment technologies a retailer deploys. If there is no consumer interaction, it's a little bit different decisioning, not consumer, but crew interaction or associate interaction with the payment. But when there is that associate interaction, there is a touch point there that you want to make sure they're trained right, they understand the technology, the messaging is accurate. So turning on a new mobile payment solution really is never turnkey, in my opinion, especially if the consumer, like I said, interacts with a human on the other side to execute that payment. So that is, these are all things to consider when it comes to the technology. It's not just about the hardware and software. Kathy, you can go to the next one. Continuing on technology, a little more on hardware needs and training deployment required. Unless a merchant is seeking really the invisible payment option, there are a few examples of the types of technology a customer or store associate may have to interact with. So contactless, tap and go, QR codes, or even payment codes, each of those require certain hardware or readers at the point of sale. But even retailers that are looking for invisible options for payment, there's still hardware required to invest, such as beacons, et cetera. And payment technologies for acceptance have their strengths, but also have their drawbacks. As I mentioned earlier, some mobile payment solutions fit well within the operations and the customer experience a retailer is trying to deliver, and others may not fit so well. So, for example, QR or barcode payments require scanners, which may be prevalent in certain industries like mass merchant or grocery, but are not traditional with others, such as QSR, Petro. And contactless fits well within the consumer-facing experience, while it doesn't fit so well in the drive-through when the consumer has to, communicate through that device, pass through the device through the drive-through. But possibly a barcode in that drive-through scenario, like the Starbucks model, would work better in that environment. A consumer self-scan within a mobile app, such as the Sam Scan and Go, works well for the warehouse environments, but not necessarily in a multi-lane, multi-exit environment. And I'll call out merchant-specific payment codes. Although they probably don't require additional hardware, their use does require an exchange with the cashier or attendant to execute a mobile transaction, or the customer just ultimately uses an unattended terminal. But these payment codes can offer an additional level of identification to ensure that the consumer is at the right terminal, or to provide a backup, frankly, if the technology fails. So if normally you use GPS or Bluetooth, or the app crashes, a code can really be an alternative backup method to execute a transaction. However, that comes with data entry errors, which can turn a digital transaction back into a physical transaction. So, that's kind of going backwards. One important thing to note, though, is that significant testing in different environments is critical when it comes to these various types of technologies. For example, external scanners, they may have to face environmental challenges that need to be tested, such as temperature and glare. At one point, I know we did look at an outdoor payment device that had similar challenges. No matter what area of the country, Minneapolis or Chicago, I would say last week, 50 below, you have to ensure that those terminals that are up against those types of elements, are able to still survive and work properly. And things like Bluetooth, BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy, within a mobile payment requires, hardware beacon support. And customers have to have Bluetooth activated or at least available in the background to work well. Again, testing is critical to ensure that locations of these beacons support a positive in-store consumer experience. Another example of technology that can deliver a good experience would be geolocation. So in the franchise model of retail, settlement of payment under the right store owner is really critical. And that geolocation really can help that requirement. And I'll just give you it's my own customer experience at two different chain restaurants. My first was a mobile order ahead scenario where I used my payment card on file to place my order for pickup at the location closest to me. As you arrive, no parking was available, of course, City of Chicago, and I'm not willing to take a risk at a ticket. So pressure to get me to a meeting on time, I just had to skip pickup of the food. And unfortunately, at this particular restaurant, I was still charged for my order despite my inability to pick up my food, which was obviously a bad experience. My second experience was a mobile order ahead scenario as well, but I ordered a meal for pickup on my way home from work for the family. And on my way home, I realized I had to pick up something at Walgreens along the way. And the new route home meant I was closer to a different restaurant location for this particular chain. So I stopped that location instead to pick up my meal. And not only did the restaurant have my order ready, but approved my payment upon pickup of my food. And how it worked was through leveraging geolocation. So when I arrived on the property, it triggered a check-in process to send the order to the revised location versus the original. And it submitted the payment at the time of arrival. And in the end, these two locations may be owned by different owners, but the settlement would go to the right place. So overall, that was a good customer experience, and obviously had no back office implications either. I think the point being here, picking the right technology can support the overall positive experience, or it cannot sometimes support that. So it's definitely a consideration set. Kathy, you can go to the next slide. As new mobile, we got a new quick poll. So this is the question: what mobile payment technologies do you expect to see proliferate over the next 12 months? We've got NFC EMV contactless, payment codes, QR codes, invisible payments, or pay buttons. So we got a high response rate on NFC EMV contactless, especially in light of all the news of contactless issuance and cards. You know, I know there's a lot of consideration that will drive mobile contactless payments as well, as consumers get comfortable using the tap and go environment. So I can see why that says 78%. And it looks like payment codes, which I would agree is almost like a remote use case, but still something that folks see will continue. And then pay buttons, surprisingly, was a little lower than I expected in light of some of the news around what the marketplace is moving towards. So, but that's interesting. I love that invisible payments is high. So thanks. Interesting. So the next part of the technology story, you know, as new mobile payment solutions enter the market, merchants, you know, oftentimes struggle to implement these new solutions quickly. There's development lead times you have to deal with, technology requirements you have to develop, and obviously competing IT priorities. But many retailers, you know, have to consider whether, you know, I build it or whether I buy it, whatever it might be within what you're trying to deliver. I think white label alternatives may offer faster times to market than in-house development. However, you know, those white label solutions may be less flexible. They may provide less control over the customer experience that we talked about earlier. It may be more difficult to integrate with things like your inventory management and fulfillment systems, which are obviously critical to enabling a good shopping experience. They may be more difficult to integrate into existing fraud prevention tools. So all of these are things you need to think about in picking the right approach to implementation of mobile payment technologies. You can go to the next slide, Kathy. And retailers oftentimes have to consider how integration of a new mobile payments technology integrates into other customer engagement platforms. Many traditional physical retailers have never had to support an e-commerce platform with integration into loyalty or inventory management systems, et cetera. But you're finding now, really, there's very few retailers that don't, physical brick and mortar retailers that don't also have now a digital alternative with payment, and mobile being one. So, you know, as merchants introduce various digital channels such as mobile payments, there is an entire architecture evaluation and review that sometimes has to be done. Introducing a new mobile channel can lead to not only a digital transformation effort by the organization. I think there's also an IT transformation and a whole modernization that could be taking place of legacy systems in order for a mobile payment solution or a digital strategic offering to be delivered. So it can be a huge effort. And I think the point being here is the technology side of the equation can be a major factor in timeline and the effort required for a merchant to deploy a new mobile payment solution. So you can go to the next slide, Kathy. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the topic of security and risk, since Marianne did a great job on the security aspects of the various mobile solutions in the marketplace. I think my point here is that merchants are, because they are on the front lines of the retail experience and the customer relationships they have, they need to understand how much and what kind of, you know, things like data is being passed by a mobile solution, and they also need to manage the data security concerns and protect against negative brand exposure or financial loss, and including fraud, provisioning of accounts for those that are implementing proprietary mobile payment products and solutions, as well as protecting sensitive cardholder data. So there's, you know, it's a brand implication, so it's something that all retailers must pay attention to. So some questions to ask as you're considering payment alternatives, so mobile payments solutions. You know, ask about the methods of authentication being used. What are the methods of security to protect confidential customer or even proprietary merchant data? Things like SKU level data, names, emails, addresses. not just the payment information. There's a whole host of stuff you want to understand. How does the customer load or provision financial products or accounts into a wallet? Does this vary depending on the environment for which the customer is provisioning the product, whether it's a first-party app, a third-party app, or a digital wallet? Is there data available on the efficacy of the provisioning process for the wallet product? And if so, what does that data show? How effective is the provisioning to ensure fraud accounts are not loaded? And what security features does the product include? What are the default acceptance settings, customizable features that can be enabled, and any specific business requirements? Where's the storage of the cardholder payment information? How is that transmitted and stored at different points throughout the transaction, including at rest as well as in flight? Things like tokenization, is it being used, is encryption used, etc. So I think these are just some things that as a retailer you have to consider as you're deciding on a partner, just so that you understand your risk, which is an important consideration. Kathy, you can go to the next slide. General acceptance is another consideration. There are various regulations, acceptance terms, and payment network rules that govern payments, including any mobile payment solution. And these terms are binding, and they should be reviewed with your appropriate professional advisors. But they could have significant implications for cost or security risk, and even operational matters, things like uptime. Another consideration is how data is used. How is the data accessible, and what are the rules of engagement around the use of that data? And this encompasses not just consumer data, but also merchant data. A couple things merchants should be aware of is when it comes to things like NFC contactless, merchants don't have necessarily a direct contractual relationship with individual mobile wallet providers. So that's one consideration. Merchants may not necessarily be able to distinguish transactions from the particular mobile wallet providers. And I know the U.S. Payments is working on this. There's really no current standard wallet identifier that enables merchants to differentiate transactions by wallet provider. And there are use cases we're flushing through on merchants' ability to troubleshoot issues, co-marketing or promotions, or performing independent analytics on wallet usage by type. Those are some of the use cases that potentially a wallet identifier might be helpful for, but currently it's not necessarily consistently available. And another thing is, if you do accept one mobile payment solution that leverages EMV contactless, you are required to accept all wallets that leverage EMV contactless technology. I mentioned McDonald's. We accepted cash. We started accepting cashless 14 years ago now, and so we made the decision to implement contactless at the same time we deployed cashless acceptance overall. And 10 years later is when Apple Pay came onto the scene, and then Samsung Pay, Google Pay. And although these were new participants in a technology that wasn't contemplated when McDonald's originally deployed contactless 10 years ago, it was something they had to accept. Another consideration when you think about acceptance of different payment solutions, one aspect of the security behind certain types of payments, network payment tokenization that supports security of transactions in flight. There are some challenges with how that impacts your merchant choice for routing debit transactions. So that's another consideration that can factor into the overall cost and ROI for implementing a new payment product that may leverage a different type of tokenization. So these are some of the overall larger things that take a lot of detail and time to understand, but definitely leverage your acquirer and other third parties in your ecosystem to help educate you, so you can at least understand what the implications are on accepting particular payment products. You can go to the next slide, Kathy. The last, I'm not going to, this is financial in the end. Merchants have to evaluate the opportunity to drive sales and balance that with the cost. Some of the financial implications we've already talked about: one-time implementation costs, such as software development, hardware, training, and promotion. Ongoing costs can include maintenance, hosting, licensing, and transaction fees. Those fees, transaction fees, include interchange, network fees, security fees, and processing fees. And there's things like payment mix, so remote versus physical mobile payments. There's a different cost structure there. What about the mix of credit and debit transactions? As you think about implementing a remote payment, some consumers prefer not to use debit in a remote environment, even though they choose to use debit in a physical environment. How is that going to change as you introduce a remote payment alternative through mobile? Alternative payment methods within the transaction. If there's a significant percentage of transactions that originate from things like ACH, closed loop, or private label, you need to consider how those will impact the overall cost, switching from those lower cost payment types to something else. And then fraud liability, performance and fraud management. All of those are considerations that impact resources, potential risk that would be built into an overall financial model and ROI. Without doing your due diligence there, the merchant, may be pursuing a large investment in an uninformed way. So financial is a big one. So we can go to the last slide, I believe, is just talking. Oh, we have a polling question before we do that. This goes to what I was just talking about. Do you change your behavior as a consumer when you shop in store versus when you shop on e-commerce channels such as digital? And the answer is yes or no. Do you change that behavior and the type of card you might use when you're comparing a physical to a digital payment? Personally, I do. I feel more comfortable with credit when I'm shopping online versus my debit card, which is accessible to your bank account. But there is a lot of security in mobile payments, and so the commerce channel, if it's mobile, as we heard from Marianne, is quite secure. But it's interesting; it's kind of split half and half. So the last slide is really just providing you with some additional materials you can have access to. I think this is going to be made available, but these are links embedded here that you can go to learn more about the product analysis tool I mentioned earlier. Know Your Payments is a site that provides some very quick hit education to help you get smarter about payments. And then obviously you can go to the MAG site to learn more about Merchant Advisory Group. So I'll pause there, and I clearly went way longer than I expected.
Thank you, Laura. That was a great presentation. Before we take questions, I wanted just to tell you a little bit more about the online assessment and other resources that are available. So our mobile wallet webinar series does have an online assessment quiz for each webinar. And if you participate in all 4 webinars and get passing the score on the quizzes, receive a certificate and a registration discount for the 2019 Payment Summit. The assessment link you see here on the screen, and it will be in the follow-up email that you'll get with the link to the recording and a link to the presentation as well. Other resources I wanted to mention, the U.S. Payments Forum is having its member meeting co-located with the 2019 Payment Summit on March 11th to the 14th in Phoenix. The 11th and 13th is the forum meeting where we have roundtables, SIGs, working committee, and birds of a feather sessions. And the Payment Summit from the 12th to the 14th is an open public conference with multiple tracks covering all things payment. We also have a white paper that Laura actually contributed a major section to on mobile and digital wallets in the U.S. landscape, and it's available on our website along with other resources at uspaymentsforum.org. So I'll put up our contact information while we go through some of the questions. Laura, one of the questions that came up is about the contactless experience at the point of sale and the fact that the Apple Pay was used as the example that depending on what merchant you go to, there are different processes. And the question was, why is that? And is there a way to come up with a more standardized process?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think one of the examples that I have experienced is some merchants, that accept contactless may not have necessarily implemented pinless, and there may be then kind of this awkward, okay, I've transacted with my mobile phone, a contactless transaction, and then I'm prompted for a PIN on the terminal. So I think there's just, some adjustments merchants may need to make to consider that experience and implement something that enables no PIN required. But there are considerations that they have to make on what that means behind the scenes. So I think also the struggle I've heard is, where where on the terminal do I place my phone for a contactless transaction may vary slightly. So it can be a little bit of a struggle for the consumer. But I don't know, other than educating the associate on how best to educate the customer at that point in time, how to address that. I don't know that there's another alternative to solve that. Hopefully that answers the question. I know there's some inconsistencies in just general contactless acceptance. There's quite a few merchants that don't currently accept. And I have to say, from a crew person's perspective, the usage has been quite low, which if you train a person, an individual with a restaurant turnover rate of over 150%, and they only see maybe a couple transactions I don't know, in a week, it's really hard to have that repeat experience available to kind of re-engage them and how to manage that transaction and how to manage that customer interaction when they have an issue. So I think usage will potentially increase over time, which then could help improve that repetition for associates that get more familiar. So that's just a few thoughts that I had. I don't know, hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, so I'd like to add that the forum actually has a project. We're writing a white paper on best practices for the cardholder experience at the point of sale. We expect that to be done sometime later this spring, but it's looking at things like where do you place your phone, what type of messaging, and offering some suggestions, since this has obviously come up in a number of cases. I want to take a couple more questions, so we'll run a couple minutes over here. I hope that's okay with everyone. Laura, there's a couple questions on, I think, that harken back to your experience at McDonald's on drive-through. And so one was, why isn't there a good terminal for contactless for drive-through? And another is getting your perspective on QR versus NFC in terms of the advantages or disadvantages.
So on the first question, it's a great question, and I ask the same question all the time. I still don't know why there's not a good terminal that you could leverage for. I'll have to say, we worked very hard when I was with McDonald's to try and engage the ecosystem to look at a solution, and we just found that we tried several devices. One was pretty big and bulky, and I think got hit a few times. Others just didn't. None of them were really feasible from a cost standpoint, but also from an experience standpoint. So I'm still asking the same question. So I don't have a good answer other than I agree that's a great question. I think it's an industry. It's one that the industry should be able to solve if they spend the time on it. On regards to QR versus or barcode versus NFC, I think one of the the benefits of QR is, for certain verticals, they already have the barcode. So, it is an easier decision to implement QR code acceptance if you've already got the capability at your checkout lines. The other thing is, I think it is easy to connect an overall payment experience of value-added services within a proprietary app. So again, as I talked about the overall value prop, NFC today doesn't necessarily deliver on all the other capabilities that merchants want to deliver to their consumers. It is just primarily about payment. I think some of the pays have done some interesting things to enable some additional value-added services, but I think QR code embedded within a proprietary app can offer a lot of flexibility and additional value-added services versus NFC. So that's a few of my headlines. I think are implications of cost that need to be considered. QR code in most cases is considered card not present, which is a higher cost. But if you're able to offer a higher engagement level, maybe that's something that's worth it.
All right, thank you, Laura. Well, we are now over time, so I want to wrap up. I do invite you, if you have specific questions for Laura or for me, to send those to us after the call as well. I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar, and a special thanks goes to Laura for a great presentation and Q&A session. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available for playback along with the presentation deck. You'll receive an email with a link where you can listen to the recording and download the presentation, and that link will also have the presentations and the recordings from the past 2 webinars. Please feel free to share this information within your organization to others who couldn't participate in today's webinar. And we hope that you'll join us for our final webinar on issuer considerations in 2 weeks. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you and have a good day.